Margarita, I'm resonating a great deal with how you began with the kind of experiences that you're having with your students. And one thing that you mentioned in your opening comments that I think is particularly relevant to my students is that they've operated in, for most of their life, a world in which they're told that there is no fixed reality, right? Or nature. Forget about, for the moment, human nature, just nature, that there's a standard, there is something created that is fixed. And therefore, they've operated without any belief that there's something called truth to which they should aspire. And my experience very recently has been that when you expose students to the opportunity to both get a structure for thinking about these things and also give them an end, truth, that there's a kind of excitement. Even if they're not really prepared for it yet, there's a kind of excitement for it. So it seems to me that one of the challenges that we're facing in our time is that the educational systems, most of them at least, that we see in our nation, are not preparing students to recognize that they belong to a reality, and therefore not offering them the thing that they should naturally be most hungry for, the belief that there's truth. And so it seems to me that's a beginning place, right? That this contrast is between a system that emphasizes knowledge that leads to power, that leads to transformation of our world, as opposed to an education that seeks to understand the things that are deepest in us. Does that fit your experiences, and do you find students currently hungry for these kinds of things?
Absolutely. When I began to think about these questions, I recall very clearly having this kind of discussion with my students about what is the philosophical basis of our ethical or political positions. And as you've just described, there are two dominant ways people answer that, right? I remember sitting with students and reading pages of Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. And one idea from Aristotle, which is still with us today in many traditions of thought, is that ethics, how we ought to live in the world, emanates from metaphysics, from an understanding of who we are. And that it is from an idea of our nature, which has in it a teleology, a purpose to it, that we derive what a good life should be, right? That what we ought to do comes from who we are. And that nature, although we're creatures that are always becoming and growing, we begin from a fixed place, which is what gives us the name of human beings, right? And that in order to understand how we should live, we need to understand who we are. Right. Another way of understanding ethics that you just alluded to is actually a rejection of the idea that there's a transcendent or perhaps metaphysical or universal truth. And all we have is knowledge that is used in powerful ways to do things in the world. So what knowledge becomes in that second framework is an instrument of the most powerful, as opposed to knowledge pointing us to a universal truth that then shapes ethical decisions. Rather, knowledge is power, and ultimately, how knowledge is deployed in ethical ways is a matter of personal preferences expressed by people who have the reins of power. So then, for example, in the thought of Herbert Marcuse, the end of education becomes to give the goods of knowledge to those who don't have power so that they can combat the powerful that are holding them down. So knowledge becomes a tool in a battle between the powerful and the powerless, rather than knowledge becoming a sign that we've reached a truth in accord with our human nature, which allows us to develop a set of principles for living together.